Hello, my name is Greg Madison. Welcome back to The Living Process. Today, my guest is Dan Schachter. Dan lives in Israel and is a clinical psychologist. As we discuss a little bit in the episode, he started out in psychoanalysis and then eventually found his way into focusing and a more experiential way of working. And we had what for me was an incredibly moving and insightful conversation about what it's actually like to be living in Israel at the moment. And we're recording it just after the first hostages have been released as part of the ceasefire. And a real palpable sense of how difficult it is to be working with clients and discussing with friends and neighbors and somehow trying to remain open while also having a clear sense of right and wrong inside of oneself. And it is such a complicated situation that all Israelis and Palestinians are living in. And both of us aware that even doing a podcast on this issue opens us up to all sorts of criticism. I wanted also just to say that I would be very open and would really like to speak to someone from Gaza or Palestinian, even that's living abroad somewhere, that would like to talk about their experience of this very tragic past year and a half or so. So I hope you enjoy this episode. I think we got to a place at the end that felt, to me at least, like a satisfying pausing place. Okay, welcome to this episode and to my conversation with Dan Schachter. So welcome back to The Living Process, and this time I'm happy to say my guest is Dan Schachter. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
I'm really curious to talk to you, but the first thing that I normally ask people, and I'd like to ask you, is just how you found out about focusing and kind of got into the focusing in FOT world.
Right. Yes. So, how I found focusing or how focusing was brought to me,
Yeah.
for me, it's an interesting, I don't memory because what happened was I was working in this treatment center as I'm a clinical psychologist and trained very much in psychoanalytic
Mm.
psychotherapy. That was really, it was the only thing available at the time and very strong. It still is here in Israel, but at the time, really the only kind of psychotherapy available. So I was very much there.
Mm-hmm.
And then in this place, I was quite new there when this happened. A colleague, a psychologist, who is now my very close and dear friend and colleague, and traveling very much on the same journey. But at that time, we just met.
Mm-hmm.
She brought me this little, pocketbook and said, "I think this might interest you." And that was the focusing book.
Mm-hmm.
And coming from where I was at that time, I had a short look, and to me, it looked like some kind of American New Age mumbo jumbo. And I just gave it back to her and said, thank you, but not thank you, but no thank you. So that was kind of one might say, the expected reaction from someone like me at that time. The strange thing, which I really cannot explain, is that sometime afterwards, I have no memory of why or how long after, but I said to her, you remember that book? Why don't you bring it back and let me have a look at it? That was the strange thing. And that really describes my experience, and I like to tell it that way. The book she brought then was a different book. Of course, it was the same book, but to me it was a different book. And yes, I really, as one might say, the rest is history. It really caught me. Mm-hmm. So I still don't understand exactly what happened. I really don't.
Yeah.
But that's what happened.
Yeah. So something happened between the first looking at the book and the second looking at the book. At some level.
At some level.
Something changed.
Right. Yeah. Right. And I've done some focusing on that, trying to kind of fill in that gap, but not really being able to. It still is some kind of a gap, an opening.
Interesting.
Curious.
It's also interesting to me that I wouldn't initially, I mean, of course, I know it's happened, but I wouldn't initially think that someone trained in psychoanalysis would, at least on first glance, be that interested or open to something like focusing. It would seem not very rigorous or something, maybe.
Yeah, no. Yeah, too different, too strange. Yeah, right.
So what happened next? You somehow, the second time you took to the book?
I took to the book. I read the whole book. I felt I had to start experimenting with this. I was up against this thought that those two worlds cannot meet, cannot be combined. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, the feeling that they just have to. And there was no way to learn focusing from anybody in Israel at that time. Ruhama, my friend, since she had studied in the States, in California, psychology.
Okay.
With different direction, different culture. She had a course there led by John Wellwood on focusing as part of her training. So that's how she knew it. Okay. And then she had come back to Israel, and so that's how she knew it. And there was nobody doing focusing, there was nobody teaching focusing, so I just had to start out on my own from just, on the basis of that book. And I started doing a little bit of work with myself and trying with clients, and it just started taking on a life.
Wow.
I got an invitation in the mail. It was still at the time when we got letters in the mail. This happened in around 93 that I was given the book.
Okay.
So, and then I got an invitation to a trauma conference, and it said that one of the key presenters will be someone called Peter Levine that I hadn't heard of. And at the time, I wasn't very interested in going into trauma therapy, but it said that what he had developed, somatic experiencing, was based among other things, was based on focusing. So that's why I went to that conference and met Peter Levine. And after that, the first SE training happened in Israel, and I joined that. So I learned, I did the SE training.
Mhm.
And only after that, when I felt I also wanted to start teaching and knowing more in depth, did I do, courses in focusing. That was after SE. It was
Interesting.
kind of a roundabout
Hmm. Hmm.
process.
I'm curious what happened to your psychoanalysis during all of this.
Yeah. How to say that in just one sentence or two? It has become, it is a complex and interesting relationship.
Hmm.
Somehow, sometimes I say it's a it's a love-hate relationship. So I've become very critical to many parts of psychoanalytic practice and what has become of it, and but also today psychoanalysis and psychoanalytic psychotherapy is not one thing. There's so
Hmm.
many schools and directions, and
Yeah.
I now know some of them quite well, but I do some sort of integration. It's in my formative years in psychology and psychotherapy were there, so it's part of me,
Hmm.
and and it's there in many ways, but and also as something to be critical, to change, to refresh, to yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Um, our conversation partly came about because where you live, there is so much going on at the moment.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, as another psychologist, one of the things I'm curious about is just in terms of your practice, is how is the kind of current state, the conflict, the crisis, the war that's going on, or now that we're talking, it might be that there's a ceasefire, so maybe, it might be history. But what has it been like to do what I imagine often is very sensitive work when you're in an environment that in some ways maybe feels quite unstable?
Hmm. Yeah, how to answer that?
Yeah.
Yeah, and what on the one hand, I have so much to say about that. That's the situation we've been living in for since last in
Mhm.
October 23. And on the other hand, um, what I would like to try to do is to really answer from a felt sensing place and to see what comes and what's present, hearing that question from you right now.
Mhm.
Um, um, so yes, you mentioned there being a ceasefire. So as of yesterday, there is a ceasefire, and I would say that that is affecting us and affecting me deeply. And the reaction to that is very, very, very complex. Yeah, it's not as it might sound maybe from the outside. There has been a war, and now the war has ended. There's a lot of apprehension. Nobody, I think, really believes that the war has ended.
Mhm.
Part of what is happening, as that started yesterday, 3 hostages were released, Israeli hostages. And I remember talking, especially now it comes up with a client who said when that will start, when the hostages will start coming back, that will be amazing, and we're all looking forward to it and that, but it will also be a process of again facing what has happened.
Yeah.
And regarding, so that the Israeli side, and then there is Gaza, and right now my feeling, my sense is, first of all, huge relief for Gaza. No matter on, yeah, somehow to say no matter what happens, no matter, but in some way, regardless of what happens, each hour, each day of not war for the people in Gaza is, such a blessing.
Yeah.
Now, they are also facing not just the end of hostilities as of now, but the reality of what has happened there. People have been displaced, now starting to come back to where they used to live and finding rubbles and destruction. So it's I don't know which word to use. It has so many layers and so many different feelings, and then there is this very, very, very complex and torn society that we're living in. So anyone you would talk to and ask that questions, you would hear a different story.
Yeah.
And different feelings and different perspectives and angles, and yeah, there's the war, and there's also, we are living in a society that is going through a very, very deep crisis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So there's kind of all of that and so much more.
So let me just say back some of that. I hadn't realized until you started talking exactly how complex this is. That it isn't a clear-cut celebration that hostilities have ended.
Right.
There might be some of that in some ways. If people are
Yes.
not, yeah, if people aren't being bombed, if people are being able to come home, then there is something positive. But it's within a larger context that is is maybe broader even than what happened October 2023, that perhaps in Israel and in Gaza, but at least in Israel, the whole society is very diverse. People have very different points of view and very different feelings about what happens next and about whether this will last. There's some apprehension that in some way this isn't over yet.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just curious what it's like to be living in that kind of a situation, what it does inside of you.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that has been a central theme in my process during this time. How it is to live in such a situation, how it affects me, how it is to work, how it is to be a therapist.
Yeah.
And so focusing, felt sensing,
Hmm.
TAE, the philosophy of the implicit, for me, throughout this time, have been immensely valuable resources on a daily basis for myself, working with myself, focusing with my focusing partners, and in my work with clients. Yeah. So without going more deeply into that right now, just to say that's very important for me.
That the experiential depth of working and thinking in this kind of situation has been a godsend in some way. It's been very useful.
Very useful. Yeah, crucial.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I'm curious about that.
Um, yeah, I wonder how to. I don't know if you would have any specific questions there, or if I could to make that more concrete and clearer, maybe examples, instances. Right, let's say two themes and the tension between them, or two, which word to use here? Let's say themes. One being a need I feel to be as open as possible to anybody, to everybody, to different experiences, beliefs, perspectives, in a non-judgmental way, really open, and wanting to deepen my openness to all of that, and wanting to help people deepen their experiences. And then on the other hand, this theme of needing to stay true to myself and my values and my perspective and my opinions and my politics.
Yeah.
And there's a tension with those two.
Yeah.
And how not to collapse into that and not to collapse into that.
Mm-hmm.
That has been, and still is, a central theme for me. And that has come up also, with clients, with colleagues, with in focusing sessions.
Mm-hmm.
We are not the same.
Mm-hmm.
As I said before, that is of course always true, but my experience is that in this specific situation and society, it is sometimes even extreme, the differences.
Yeah.
And someone, even among friends, family, colleagues, clients,
Mhm.
someone might trigger you, seriously, your basic beliefs. I think I didn't mention that before, but there are many people here who are opposed, and use that right now as an example, or opposed to the ceasefire, who see that as a capitulation. Is that the
Yeah.
yeah. And yeah, and to say something about my reaction to that, for me to be part of a society in which there's and not a few, but it has become more and more outspoken and more decisive in the decisions of this government. These that outlook, opinion, those politics of this is a just war and we need to do as much as we can to win this war, and this slogan of total victory. That's the slogan, total victory. That is very, very, very difficult for me.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not the only one. I'm not alone.
Yeah.
And it's very important to find people who see things similarly to oneself in such a situation. But yeah, that is challenging.
Can I just say back to you, I mean, I'm imagining for many of us, it's difficult to encounter others that have different points of view, sometimes very radical points of view. But it feels like a very different thing to be encountering a different point of view in the midst of such a deep and fundamental crisis where you live. Then the other point of view, I imagine for myself at least, the other point of view can feel very threatening and even
Yeah,
frightening.
yeah.
Yeah. How do you remain open to that when it creates such a immediate response in you?
I hear you saying that. How do you remain open? And my reaction was, um, yeah, right. It would be, I'll say it like this, it would be easy for me to say how to remain open, but then another voice kicked in and wanted to also say how to remain open and how to know when the right thing to do is to close oneself.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And from that part of me, that is difficult to hear. What do you mean? I don't want to close myself. I want to, but it's like, I call it's like an identification with this wanting to be open.
Mhm.
And then there is also this, you cannot always be open. Sometimes one has to, yeah, what is that closing? It's protecting for sure.
Mhm.
It's a protecting, and it comes as it's a distancing. I need distance from
Mhm.
many things, yeah, that are voiced, that are in this situation. Yes, it's really needing a distance. Um, yeah, otherwise there would be danger. There's some sort of overwhelm.
Mhm. Yeah, it's interesting to me when you say that it's a closing and distancing. I was also imagining, which you didn't say, that there could be a part of a person that feels like there comes a time when it's right to take a stand that implies showing the other person a different point of view or showing the other person another way of thinking or something, somehow making a claim on the interpersonal space that you also are there and wanting to have that space preserved.
Yes.
I don't know how that sounds to you, if that's a part of your experience, or.
Oh, yes, very much so. And two examples come up
Mhm.
in yes, and then also the need first to say something about yes, this what came up for me in the focusing session, and then I wrote something about that in that post that you saw on that focusing on the discussion list.
Yeah.
The image of a minefield and that and yeah, the context of that, just to say that shortly, was that someone wrote that Tiffy, the institute should publish a statement denouncing the genocide committed by Israel in Gaza, and I felt I had to write something. Couldn't stay silent to that, and did some focusing, and there was right away a very powerful image of, I just saw a leg stepping down, touching the ground, and being cut in pieces. That's the image I saw. And when I sat down to write, the word, the term that came, the description was that when saying something, doesn't matter who and it doesn't matter what, something about the situation here, saying something, using a word, saying a sentence, writing a sentence is stepping into a minefield. No matter what you say, someone will attack you.
Yeah.
Someone will get hurt by what you said. Someone will feel threatened, get offended. And that also describes my experience also right now. It's present and in my thoughts that, people who I don't know will watch this, listen to this, and I'm with all of what I'm saying, I'm stepping into that minefield.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that. And maybe one isn't, it's like a kind of experience, but let me say it like this. And of course, staying true to client confidentiality, but I've had a few experiences with clients during this time. It feels like whatever I will say about this, it will not convey the complexity and the difficulty.
Yeah.
But I guess there's no other way. Clients going to do to join as soldiers fighting in Gaza while being in therapy.
Wow. Okay.
Now that was different in the beginning of this war as compared to the last months. Okay, I need to probably open up a parenthesis here. I am part of a group, again, say this shortly, called PsychoActive, which is mental health professionals for human rights and against the occupation. And one of our main issues there is, the issue of therapy and politics and neutrality versus taking a stand, and how to navigate that as therapists.
Yeah.
Okay. Close parenthesis there, and big jump. With some clients, I made a decision at some point to open up, to say something about how I see this situation, and making, very strong statements. It also came out differently with each of these clients, but basically saying something about both that I'm worried about how this will affect them, and also saying that I must say, reluctantly struggling against it, but having had to come to the conclusion that, well, with none of the clients I've used the word of genocide, but I have used the term war crimes. And saying that is now part of what we're having here, our interaction, that I view what you are now involved in as war crimes. That's a minefield.
Absolutely. Yeah, a minefield right in the consulting room.
Right. And yes, as I said, I'm saying this very, you can imagine what process that has been.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't quite imagine. It is so, on the one hand, it sounds very brave, and maybe you didn't feel like you had a choice. You somehow had to say something. I don't know.
Yeah, something is now coming up, and then there's also a question: why does that come up now? Maybe there's something there about looking for some sort of balance. Maybe it is something in me trying to counterattack the attacks I'm now experiencing, and there will be. But that's not the only reason. This is something I have to say also. It's not related directly to therapy, but again, the boundaries here between the professional and the personal, and that's part of such, really the complex situation we're living in, when we're all involved in this, going through the same situation, differently experienced, but also commonly, and sitting in the consulting room, and both of us knowing that at some point an alarm might sound and we might have to go to the shelter. I was just thinking about that. I don't think it ever happened that I had to go to the shelter with a client during a meeting. It happened at least once during breaks. That did happen once some years ago when I was working in Tel Aviv. But that was present all the time as as something that might happen. One informs clients about where do we go, where is the shelter or the safe room. Where was I? Yes, there was this. Yes. And also another remote memory came up when in some ways, something like this has been going on here for so long.
Yeah.
Probably not, yeah, of course, not only here, but the memory that came up when way back then, before the focusing book, when I was in analysis, I came to one of the sessions, and there was a sticker on her door, the door of my analyst, with a political slogan. At the time, there was this organ, it still exists. It was more central, important at the time. It's an organization called Peace Now. And she had a sticker of Peace Now on her door. Psychoanalyst. And that was a very important experience for me. And I really appreciated her for that.
Mm.
So that was already there, objectivity, neutrality, all those. Yeah. Still, it's not really clear to me why. Yeah, this is something I'll tell you in a second, the content of this, but it's not clear to me why this came up right now. Has something to do with being an Israeli, Jewish Israeli, living here in this situation, especially this situation since October, since the 7th of October. It's not about trying to balance the different sides, because there is no balance. It's this, I would say, part of what this, also I don't feel good with the word situation. It feels so general. I feel a need to use a much bigger word. It's war, it's tragedy. For me, this is will not be true for everybody. It keeps moving me back and forth between, looking at Gaza, looking at the hostages, looking at the victims of the massacre, 7th of October, looking at what's happening in the West Bank, looking at Lebanon, looking at northern Israel. People there, they went through an awful time. That is not talked about so much. That's my impression in media around the world. And so that whatever it is moving me between those different parts of the tragedy, of the horror, brought back right now. I'm often asked, has anyone close to you been affected? And I say, we have been very, very lucky. And then one of these words, events that in some way was one of the closest for me was my younger son went to kindergarten with, at the time, a girl. He's now in his mid-30s. I remember her, especially from that time, many years ago. This lively, lovely little girl. They didn't stay in contact, and I hadn't known that she was living in kibbutz down south. She was killed she was killed, her husband, their 3 little children, and her mother-in-law. And this is, just one example. Her name was Tamar Kedem. I feel the need to say her name. My older son lives with his family also down south. This is such a tiny little place, Israel. They were luckily, that's why I keep saying we have been so lucky. The terrorists that came in on that day were stopped a few kilometers away from where they live. And they, the day after, evacuated and didn't move back for several months. So that has been very present. Yeah, that's kind of for now.
I mean, you're really giving me and people watching this, I assume, an insight into the actual lived reality of this and how complex it is. And when you just tell about those details, and yet taking the stand that you have done with at least some clients, and I imagine friends and others, like you were saying, that must generate such a specific feeling in the body of being so closely attuned to the tragedy in one respect, and at the same time also expressing the tragedy for others. I can't quite imagine. I mean, many of us, I think, in the rest of the world that have been witnessing some of this from such a distance and only getting generalities and sort of montages on the news or whatever, it makes such a difference to hear about the actual lived reality of it. I can imagine now a little bit more what it might feel like to be a body in the middle of all of that.
You're saying to be a body, and that brings up, I'll tell you a little bit about a focusing moment. Yeah, that's really the right way, because it wasn't a session. I was driving back home from Haifa, driving on the highway, the Mediterranean on my right side, the Carmel Mountain on the left side. And something, while I was driving, I didn't have any intention to focus, right?
Mm-hmm.
But something like hit me so strongly, I had to stop the car at the side of the road. Like, I couldn't wait till the next whatever gas station or parking lot. And it was again, what word to use? A feeling, a sensation. As a focusers will understand this.
Yeah.
Simultaneously, a feeling, a sensation, a realization, a thought that this living through this is changing my body in a very tactile, physical, concrete way. That's what it felt like. yeah, it felt like something was the word in English, like something that is a very strong force, like when you work on concrete to break it, or something boring into maybe my body and changing it, like a mix of in a very strong and powerful way, and also very gradual. And I had to write, and I wrote in short, and then I expanded it when I came home. That was a very powerful moment, and that, maybe only focusers can understand that. Saying, not illogical, but more than logical things like, I have a different body now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I'm wondering, I feel like we could talk about sort of the personal impact of all of this for a long time, and I'm fascinated and I care about that. But I'm also wondering, as a focuser, as a focusing oriented therapist, outside of the consulting room and outside of your own personal situation, more in terms of the social or the political context, whether you have found that knowing focusing has made a difference, maybe not only to the way you respond to the larger context, politically or socially, but also whether, in your view, it has something to offer the society or the larger community or something.
If focusing has something to offer.
If focusing has something to offer, and if focusing, being a focuser, makes I'm tempted to say, meaningful difference in this kind of situation, politically and socially. I know it does personally.
Right. So it makes a meaningful difference to me. And then there's the wider
Mm-hmm.
perspective. That's what you're asking about, right?
That's right.
Yeah, that it's not an easy question. It's not an easy, doesn't have, I think, one answer.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I can say is that in participating, let's say, in conversations, discussions about what's happening, what we're going through, when I have been able to, I'm not always able to, but when I have been able to relate, I want to say, not only in the regular way, regular talking, regular words, regular thinking, but in a more felt sensing, and inspired by my understandings from the philosophy of the implicit. When I have been able to respond from there, some people respond positively to that. It makes a difference to them. It opens up something new. Not everybody.
Yeah.
Some people do. And what is that responding, that kind of responding? Well, it's first of all the slowing down, the taking time, asking for time, saying, give me some time, I can't respond right away. Because then I would respond with, all these ready-made words. And then saying something, remind me of something that was mentioned in one of the discussions on the list about TAE, really this central part of TAE, the question, what do you mean when you use that word?
Mm-hmm.
And not only throwing the word back and forth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
To some people, that has been meaningful and new. I really feel there's an opening there.
Mm-hmm.
And people, as you know, are not used to thinking, talking that way.
And is that what you meant when you said that the philosophy as well has been helpful to you? Is it sort of in that way of kind of opening up words and trying to get the deeper sense of them and not assuming that you know what someone else means?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. That also, but maybe we won't go so much into that right now. Of course, also in professional exchanges,
Mm-hmm.
which outside of the focusing world, I find so much about throwing words and terms back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
I find it very meaningful and not easy to find a way to bring that in.
Yeah.
It sounds strange. People can't relate to it. I'm very wary of not going into a position of trying to convince people or to preach, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's a fine balance there. So many things, but for example, about what words are and how they're created and how they function, and the sentence of Gendlin that I love, where he says, how does it go exactly? Words mean the change they make when they are said. Not this detached
Mm-hmm.
dictionary kind of meaning. The change, they are the change. So what kind of change do you enable when you use a certain word? And that's so much more important than if I'm right or wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine, I mean, like everyone, I've been involved in heated discussions about particular, topics or issues that nothing's on the line except presenting your point of view or winning an argument or something. And if in those arguments you were to try to slow down and ask what a person means by the word relational or something, um, you can often see the other person getting quite frustrated. It's like you're slowing them down and they're on a roll. And it can be very, it's not always a welcome intervention.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I'm sure you know quite a lot about that. Have some experience with that,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yes.
And then that's also a thought that I've had with lots of questions around it. So that is always true. And then in a situation like this, I mean, it's how in in a critical situation, how can you slow down?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
There's some serious questions there. Is it right at all to slow down in situations where, I think in extreme situations where very quick action is needed?
Yeah.
It's not the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And then there are all situations in between.
Mm-hmm.
And then there is, when is there an identification with this idea that one has to respond quickly, but it isn't real, and then one should try to slow. They're all the different grades and variations there, but it's not possible always to slow down.
Yeah.
It's not right even.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why one of the reasons I was wondering, I think it's very easy in situations that might be polarized and divisive, but lives are not at stake.
Mm-hmm.
It's can be easy to imagine that focusing might be a very useful, focusing and listening, a very useful thing for people to know.
Yeah.
I'm a person who does think that, but in your situation for your whole country, and your whole region, I wonder, like you've just said, does knowing focusing or teaching focusing, does it have a place? Is it a welcome opportunity or possibility for people, or is that something that might come years from now?
Mm. Yeah, my reaction right now when you said years from now, I want to say, no, 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 no. Again, there's a strange thing there. There's an urgency about that. We cannot wait.
Yeah.
Yeah, we cannot wait. We have to do that right now. Some sort of teaching of focusing. And also what came to mind, a very close friend of mine who lives further up north. They were not evacuated, but they were under bombardment for months. She opened up, she owns a treatment teaching center. That has been a center for teachings of focusing and philosophy and TAE for several years now. She opened up that space during the war for all kinds of activities. Among them, focusing, teaching, giving focusing sessions, inviting in teachers and practitioners. And it was an enormous resource for months during this situation. Tremendously important while being bombarded.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, well that's nice to hear. That sounds hopeful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What, as an Israeli, what your response to all of us on the outside, what your response to our comments or input or whatever, what's it been like for you to, even on the focusing discussion list, to, I mean, I'm asking basically because I'm thinking if I was you, I might have a strong response to all these people that have points of view on my situation and yet aren't in it.
Mm. Right. Another complex situation.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I would call that a minefield, maybe, but also very, very complex. And I don't have one reaction thought to very diverse experiences, feeling from some people that their sensitivity, openness, curiosity, care, definitely for many, many people. And then there is the strong, strong experience from people, from reading, from the media and that feels for me like the main thing happening is that very few people can hold complexity.
Yes.
One has to take sides. And again, it's like fractals. Just saying that opens up more complexity, because I'm not someone who's saying not to take sides. I take a side. I have an opinion. I express my political view, my world view. But so how to hold the complexity? I mean, do you have to be for Israel against the Palestinians, or the opposite? And then the next thing is, what does for or against mean? If I am for the rights of the Palestinians, so very much of what happens on the, let's call it now, another bad word, the left. Here, the people who are, where I feel very much at home, and very often an outsider, very supportive of the Palestinians and the rights of the Palestinians and against the occupations. So, but does that mean you cannot criticize things done by Palestinians? Does that mean you cannot protest against Hamas and against terrorism? And the same with the other side.
Mm-hmm.
Does it mean to support Israel? Support Israel, does that mean that you support everything done by Israel? I'm an Israeli. I am very, very, very critical to what Israel is doing now. And I love Israel. I love the people here. I love this place, and I hate it very often. Yeah. So this again, collapsing into for and against, taking sides, and then the challenge to stay with the complexity, but without it being wishy-washy.
Mm-hmm.
That's also not easy. Anything goes. Again, I'm open to everything and everybody. Does that mean I don't have an opinion? I don't take a stand? I stay silent? It doesn't work either for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let me say that back to you, because I really resonate with that. Not just on this topic, but on many topics. But right now, in our discussion on this topic, I really agree with that sentiment of being open to the complexity, but also being open to the stand that feels right within oneself. That there's a way of standing within what feels like one's own truth without cutting oneself off from the whole picture, and having some kind of a stand does not necessitate becoming simplistic and making everything into black and white. It doesn't imply that, and it so often is what happens.
Yes.
And the last thing I want to say, speaking to another psychologist and to another focuser, is I find it very discouraging if, as psychologists, psychotherapists, or as focusing people, all we can do is the same as what everyone else does.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
For me, that's not good enough.
Yeah.
I hold us to some kind of a different standard that with all of the work that we do on ourselves and with others, all the processing we do in focusing and learning how to hold a space and allowing a process to come and to listen to people and allowing them to have their process. If we can do all of that, then when it comes to a real world situation like this, surely we can do something better than to collapse back into a simplistic right and wrong way of viewing things.
Yeah, resonates with me clearly. Yeah, I've had many disappointments around that from therapists, focusers,
Yeah.
and also good experiences. But yeah, it seems that we, and I don't want again to say, they collapse into black and white. And of course, that happens to me too.
Yeah.
And that's apparently unavoidable. But I do want to demand from myself to try to extract myself from that after it having happened.
Exactly.
And sometimes
Yeah.
better, sometimes less,
But you can feel it. For me, at least, I know immediately when I'm doing it that I might not stop doing it,
right.
but I can certainly feel when I've narrowed myself down and I'm simply, you know,
Yeah,
intent on doing something that no longer feels like I'm in the right place inside.
exactly. And then as you asked, follow up on your question, that is really, that's an edge
Mhm.
where I think we should engage with how to do that, how to enable that with other people, how to try to look for ways to enable that and to be examples of that.
Exactly. Yeah. To model that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And to show, like you were saying, that it doesn't mean that you have to end up in some kind of relativity where anything goes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then, of course, and again, I'm being drawn back, between these different, with these different forces. Then there is also, and then there are times when the only thing I feel I can do and is right is to shout as strongly as I can something about what's wrong, what's right, this shouldn't be done, this should be done.
Yeah.
There are moments like that too.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I feel like in some way we're doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Where we are standing up and shouting for something better that seems better for us at least, is to be able to own one's stand while remaining open to the full complexity of the situation and the other's point of view.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, that feels good to me. Yeah.
It feels good to me too. Yeah, I'm wondering if there's something that feels, yeah, of course, there are tons and tons and tons of things unsaid.
Mhm.
It feels like a good place to pause.
So let me just make sure and ask again, is there anything else that you would like to say at this point before,
Hmm.
before we finish?
yeah, what comes is some sort of, yeah, it feels like something compels me to some sort of responsibility to say something about, again, to mention, to acknowledge, all the people who have lost their lives and who have suffered and are still suffering
Mhm.
awfully, horribly.
Yeah.
Yeah, to recognize that.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm grateful for this conversation.
Me too.
Okay. Okay. Take care and thank you very much.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye for now.